For centuries, people around the world have looked forward to reuniting their taste buds when these delicious oysters came into season. Once abundant and cheap, fishermen harvested them as if they had an endless supply. But as popularity grew, oyster reefs around the world became over-harvested. A recent study now says that shellfish reefs are one of the most imperiled marine habitats on Earth, with an estimated 85% loss globally. The study, published by the environmental organization The Nature Conservancy and a number of other research organizations, highlight the importance of oysters to marine life. They recommend a variety of steps, such as listing oysters as endangered species, treating their habitat as protected areas like wetlands, using shells to rebuild reefs, and supporting aquaculture to raise oysters instead of fishing wild populations. Barry Truitt is the chief conservation scientist with the Nature Conservancy in the Virginia Coast Reserve.
Oysters are important because they provide ecosystem services to coastal bays and estuaries. They filter water, remove nutrients out of the water. They are ecosystem engineers in that they create habitat for other organisms like ribbed mussels and fish.
On the U.S. Atlantic coast, the Chesapeake Bay was once the epicenter for the shellfish industry in the United States. But overfishing, water pollution, and illness killed more than 90% of them in the last 2 decades. Out of the small coastal town of Oyster, Barry Truitt and Bo Lusk are leaders in the restoration of seagrasses and oyster reefs on this coast.
This white edge around here and here shows you that these oysters are fast growing this time of year.
This is a restored reef where oysters like to grow attached to other oysters. It is low tide now, but in a few hours, this reef will be completely underwater again.
These are smaller oysters that are starting to grow on the bigger ones that are underneath.
One of the biggest challenges to rebuilding reefs is finding enough shells.
People harvested oysters for hundreds of years, and they used the shells to build roads and provide calcium to chicken farms, and instead of planting the shells back overboard where they could be used to create more oysters.
An experimental initiative began a year ago to use marine-friendly concrete blocks for oysters to attach and grow. This nearby site is called Oyster Castles.
These look good.
The Nature Conservancy is now protecting over 160 square kilometers in this coastal region to restore the base of the marine food chain, consisting of salt marsh grasses, oysters, and seagrass. Bo Lusk is the marine steward with the Nature Conservancy.
We've been able to get oysters to grow where they haven't been growing. We've been able to get oysters to grow past the state where they typically were dying or being harvested.
The industry as a wild harvest is never probably going to come back to any degree. The future is going to be with aquaculture.
Professor Mark Luckenbach from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science has been working with oysters for more than 20 years. He says aquaculture is now responsible for most of the production of oysters around the world.
The issue is that oysters face a multitude of stresses in coastal environments, from water quality problems to algae blooms that I hadn't mentioned to high sediment loads that I have, and some of the places are too far gone.
Oysters are ecosystem engineers that filter water and remove pollution and excess nutrients that can spark algae blooms. But Luckenbach says their capacity has a limit, and research shows that oysters exposed to a variety of toxins are more susceptible to diseases and death.
We also have the ability, of course, in aquaculture to select for the sizes, the shapes, the growth forms that you like. These two oysters are the same species.
Scientists say that aquaculture will eventually support the entire shellfish industry for human consumption. But oysters are more than just a meal. They play a key role in marine life by protecting coastlines from storms and erosion. Professor Arthur Schwarzschild directs the Coastal Research Center with the University of Virginia.
You can think of an oyster reef as the temperate equivalent of a coral reef like we have down in the tropics. They provide habitat, feeding areas for a whole host of other animals.
For producer Zulima Palacio, Deborah Block, VOA News.